The crown cannot stand strong if the house of the dragon remains divided.
Which side will you choose? Green, black, neither. Or will you rise?
Dance of the dread. He was dying. Valerian could feel in his old bones.
After hundreds of years, death had come for him at long last.
It was time. It was time. He could cling on a while longer, he knew. Persist perhaps a few years more before his body finally failed him. But what point was there? Many of his kith and kin were long dead. Only a fading legacy remained. Aegon, his first rider, long passed. Nagar, his second, had followed soon thereafter. His third, the prince, Viserys, was a weak man who had only ridden him once and never dared again. Vhagar, his only living sibling from the day of hatching, was far from here. She at least might mourn his death, but she'd never reach him in time no matter how hard she flew. It was time.
A small part of him mourned this ignoble end. If he was to die, he wished to die hard, going out in a blaze of glory. Not to simply wither and waste away into old age. There was no glory in this death. He was the Dread, a lord of dragons, last to see old Valyria before the doom. And yet now, he could scarcely lift his wings, let alone his head. His fire had faded, only embers remained.
You too, huh?
Valerian creaked an ancient eye open. A man stood before him, at least the old Wyrm assumed it was such. He was so bright, almost blindingly so, he burned like the sun itself. Valerian could not see his face. His own weakened vision coupled with the man's radiance made it impossible. Back in his prime he would have snapped him up in a single bite. Now it was all he could do to growl. Easy, now, the man drawled. I'm not here to fight. I was wondering what I sensed, all the way out here.
He laid a golden palm on his snout. Strange man. Who was he? What did he want? Valerian, rumbled a question.
I've lived a long time too, ya know. The man's forehead touched his scales. Too long. Everyone I ever knew is dead and gone. But you'll remember me, won't you? I think. His palm pulsed. There could be no other word for it.
That you need this more than I do. Here, take it all.
Strength flowed into Valerian, bright and heady to shimmer beneath his bones. His fading fire blazed anew, his eyes shimmering with molten flame. He felt young again, powerful. There we go, a life for a life. The golden man sagged against him, dimmer than before. Make good use of it. Here at last, Valerian glimpsed blue eyes framed by whiskered cheeks and blonde hair, streaked through with gray. Live on a little longer, will you? Live. The old man grinned up at him, fingers weaving together, forming a strange series of symbols he couldn't comprehend. And someday, we'll see each other again. The light flared one last time, so bright that Valerian was forced to close his eyes against it.
When he opened them again, the man of light was gone. Only a battered headband remained.
Opening parenthesis ... Many years later.
She was dying. Rhea Royce could feel it. Feel her body tearing open on the birthing bed. Every instant was pain. Every second, agony. Torment upon torment, peaking as she screamed.
Damn that demon, a pox upon that Targaryen bastard. She'd only laid with him once. And he'd brought this upon her. She'd gotten him drunk out of spite on their wedding day, if only to teach him a lesson. Even the veiled sheep are prettier, he'd said, ha. She'd wanted to make him eat those words. Uglier than a sheep was she. Ha, she'd shown him.
Or so she'd thought at the time. More fool she. She hadn't been able to rid herself of this child. His child. Oh, she had tried at first. She'd tried and tried and tried, but day by day, week by week, month by month, the life within her only grew stronger. Eventually, she'd given up. Now, she would bring this child into the world, if only to spite him. Push, my lady, the midwife urged her. You must push. Rhea did so with a howling scream, one she was certain all of Runestone heard. By the old gods and knew the pain! It went on and on and on without end. Her hands fisted in the sheets as she prayed for release. At long last an angry wail answered her, almost as angry as she was. She slumped against her pillows, spent.
Dimly, she heard the maester's voice. "It's a boy, my lady. A son, pity, she'd hoped for a girl. Let me see him." Soon enough the cord was cut and he was pressed into her arms, wrapped in clean blue linen. She touched his face with trembling fingers. His complexion was healthy while his hair pale, almost silvery blonde, his eyes a deep, striking violet on blue. Odd, where those whiskers on his cheeks? Rhea tried to speak his name, the one she thought of for him, but she couldn't. Something compelled her to say another. Naruto. Her tongue betrayed her as surely as the realm had. His name is Naruto. Rhea held him in her arms, rocking him to and fro. He stared up at her and grew quiet, almost eerily so.
Gods above. She felt so faint, so tired. Her eyes began to droop, despite her best attempts to keep them open.
A dragon's roar shook the keep and hauled her back from the brink. Her heart leapt into her throat and not at all in a good way. She clutched her son close to her breast, ignorant of the delighted noise he made. No, it couldn't be. She'd not said a word to anyone. Kept herself in seclusion the moment her belly began to swell. The hand of the king couldn't have spies here, surely. So how?
How?
She heard raised voices, heavy footfalls, coming closer now. The door flung itself open. A knight fell through and he walked over their stunned form. "Don't get up on my account." There it was. That voice. That damn indefatigable voice. So smug, so arrogant. Clad in full armor and smelling of dragon, Demon Targaryen marched into the room, helmet tucked under one. He took one look at her, then at the babe in her arms, and her bloody bed, and his smile faded. He looked as horrified as she felt right now. Rhea took some bitter pleasure in that. For once in his life, the prince was utterly speechless. Good. Served him right. "What do you want?" she rasped at him. "Come to humiliate me again?"
He took a single silent step forward, heedless of her glare. The maester stepped aside for him. Coward. No one dared defy a Targaryen, least of all the heir to the Iron Throne. She tried to turn away, but he was too quick. He tugged the cloth back from the babe and saw his face, his eyes, his hair. She heard the sharp intake of breath that followed. It was a mercy he didn't rip the boy from her arms then and there. He would soon, she knew. She'd lost too much blood. It had been a difficult birth. Too difficult. She could see her word going dark at the edges, feel herself slipping away.
"I hope you're happy." Spite flashed in his eyes as she sneered at him. "You've killed me. This boy, your boy, killed me." Demon looked to the maester. The man shook his head. His silence infuriated Rhea.
Nothing to say, she snarled.
He looked to her at last. "For what it's worth, I may not have loved you, but I never wished this upon you." His words rattled her more than she cared to admit. "I didn't want you to die. Not like this."
Lies, deceit, and trickery. A fine job you've done then. Silence was his answer. No. She wouldn't let these be her last words.
"The boy's name is Naruto." Rhea could feel herself growing faint, now, blood loss at last taking its toll. "You take care of him, you hear?" She grabbed at his arm, clasping it with trembling fingers and shoved her son at him. "Don't you dare cast him aside. Promise me, demon, for once in your miserable, spoiled life, do the right thing. Promise me, tell me you'll protect him. Say you'll keep him safe. Promise me." His gaze flitted to the babe. His grip shifted to hold him, cradling him.
Rhea could hold on no longer. She fell into the darkness.
Her final thoughts lay with her boy. He had to live.
He must live. 0, 0.
He had a son. Daemon hadn't expected a son.
What in the nine hells was he going to do with a son? What could he? That blasted bitch had left him with one final insult. This was all her fault. He hadn't thought much of one night of drunken passion. Why would he, when he hadn't heard from her since? He'd wanted nothing to do with her at the time, nor she him. He'd only found out about the birth purely through chance. Damn that slithering snake of a Hightower. He remembered the smirk on his face, the smile when he told him.
I understand, congratulations are in order. He'd cuffed him on the jaw and flown straight here on Caraxes, just in time to watch her die. Damn it. Damn needle to the seven hells. If he had known the damn Royce woman was with child before this, he would have done nothing. A nasty little voice, his voice, whispered to him. You hated her, she hated you, and you, ha! You don't want to be a father. Let us kill the boy and be done with it. Daemon recoiled. He'd done many things, many dark deeds, but to kill a baby, a boy with his blood.
What am I to do with you?
At a loss, he gazed down at the infant. He was no father. In truth, he'd never wanted to be. Yet for him to have a son while Viserys, his own brother, struggled to produce one, it felt like destiny. He was still the heir, which would make this boy his heir. So silent. The boy wasn't making a sound. He was just looking at him.
My lord? Last, he'd forgotten all about the maester. Steeling himself, he tucked the boy against his chest, and marched up to the old man. The maester stood his ground, balked a little, as he pressed the babe into his arms.
Find a nurse for him, he commanded. As soon as he's fit to travel, he'll be brought to King's Landing. High above, he heard Caraxes roar in triumph.
0-0.
Valerian woke slowly. Age had left his old bones sore, slumber more so, but here at last, he was awake. He'd felt something just now, an old tremor in his ancient bones. Curious. There had been a shift in the world. An awakening. He felt it. So far, so distant, yet he knew it all the same. He had clung to his life in the hopes of feeling that presence once more. Slept to marshal his newfound strength. So many years of sleep, waking only to eat, stretch his wings, and rest again. He hadn't flown in years. Yet he had lived.
And now, he felt it, his return. The man who had given his life for his, born again into the world.
He wasn't the only one to notice. He could hear the dragons down in King's Landing, their cries echoing from the dragon pit across the seven kingdoms. Caraxes and Vale, roaring at the mountains. Vhagar from her distant perch, even that damnable rogue down in Dragonstone, he who feasted upon their own kind. All the dragons cried out to celebrate his birth. Valerian laid his mighty head down upon the coast and contented himself to wait. Perhaps he had reason to live a while yet. They would soon meet again. May they meet again.
I don't fear fire. It's quite comfortable, really. No, what I fear is the dirt. Being lowered into a box, my body left to rot. That won't be my fate.
Why not bond yourself to a dragon? Many of them seem quite fond of you.
His son smirked, idly stroking Carx's chin. The one I want still has a rider.
Daemon quirked a brow. Oh. You know the one. He watched the boy fling up a fish, watched now, as the blood Wyrm snapped it up. Which one indeed? Not Caraxes certainly, and not Syrax. Sea smoke wasn't a factor either at that. Only the gods knew where Vhagar was these days, and he'd already refused Vermithor. Which left.
Oh.
Realization dawned. He barked a laugh. You certainly don't lack for ambition, do you?
What's the point giving peasants money? It's fucking flea bottom. A bit of coin won't change that. Then, I will make it better.
Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right, made certain no one was near, no guards in the dead of the night. Then he raced up the wall, running full tilt.
Stay away from my daughter. Alicent can spend her free time however she wishes. Daemon's bastard of a boy grinned at him. She isn't your slave, whatever you might think. It was time. For the first time in decades.
Here and now, Valerian spread his wings and took flight. Kill him, you fools. He's just a boy. You have swords. Use them.
A boy doesn't move like that. Oh gods, here he comes again. Rasengan. Blood spattered the wall.
I greet you, he who is loved by dragons.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick. A shadow on the wall. Anyone can cast a large shadow. Especially that child.
Rhaenyra tugged on his arm. This way. Naruto sighed. Such an impatient little cousin I have.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick. A shadow on the wall.
Anyone can cast a large shadow. Especially that child. Renegade. There was something wrong with his son.
By the time Daemon noticed, it was already too late.
No malady of the body this, no, Naruto's sickness ran far deeper. His boy had proven himself skilled in every subject he set himself to. Indeed, he studied his histories and trained relentlessly. Spear, shield, staff. He mastered them all. He learned to ride a horse almost as well as he did Caraxes. His talent with the bow and blade were unsurpassed with his wit thrice as sharp. Not yet 17 and he already spoke Valyrian as if he'd been born to it and got on well with his younger cousins. And yet for all that, he was kind. Too kind by half. Daemon knew it, Viserys knew it, and he was certain that Cunt Otto Hightower did as well. Today was no different.
He found the boy down in the dragon pit as he often did these days, fussing over Caraxes. There was some irony to be had there. Caraxes despised most people, even other Targaryens. He'd eaten men for glancing at him askance before. And yet he tolerated Naruto. More than that, the blood worm allowed him to feed him and clean his scales, a feat denied even the most stoic of dragon keepers. At this very moment, he had him eating out the palm of his hand, like some mewling hatchling. Although they weren't bonded, the slender dragon was always happy to see him. Most dragons acted like that in his presence. What had Viserys called him? Once. He who is loved by dragons?
Sometimes the title worried him. More than he cared to admit.
Why not bond yourself to a proper dragon? He called out to him as he approached. Gods know you're old enough now. Many of them seem quite fond of you.
Why? His son looked up with a smirk, idly stroking Caraxes's crimson chin, drawing a pleased trill from the WYRM as he did. The one I want still has a rider.
Daemon quirked a brow. Oh! You know the one.
Curious. This was the most he'd spoken about it in years. He watched the boy fling up a fish from the basket at his feet, watched now, as the blood WYRM snapped it up with all due haste. A second, then a third. The one he wanted still had a rider. Which one indeed? Not Caraxes certainly, and not Syrax. Rhaenyra would never allow it. Seasmoke wasn't a factor either at that. Only the gods knew where Vagar was these days and he'd already refused for Mythor. Which left.
Oh. Realization dawned. He barked a laugh and clapped his son on the back. You certainly don't lack for ambition, do you? He grinned as Caraxes returned to his feast. You taught me well. He certainly had, hadn't he? That said, I'm thinking about visiting the slums tomorrow.
There it was. Not this tripe again. His son cared too much for the common folk. They were dragons. What need did they have for sheep?
What's the point in giving those peasants money? He clicked his tongue and shook his head. It's fucking flea bottom. A bit of coin won't change that. His boy rounded on him. Then, I will make it better. He patted his shoulder. You can try.
Haven't you? Naruto stood his ground, heedless of the still feasting Caraxes in the background. I heard what you did with the city watch the other day. How many hands did you take? How many heads did you put on a spike? A glint of pearly white teeth flashed in a rare snarl. I can't seem to recall. Didn't you need a car to carry all their bits away? Careful now. Daemon enjoyed the challenge, but he didn't like his tone just now. That was different. How so? His boy, his stubborn, proud, defiant boy squared his shoulders, stood his ground and lifted his chin to look up at him. You put those criminals in their place, which was all well and good, but you did it with no thought to the families left behind. How will they fend for themselves now? This is the right thing to do. Was it? He disagreed, but he saw the fire in the boy's eyes. You're going to be stubborn about this, aren't you?
That depends.
Daemon cocked his head. On. How much of an ass you're going to be today? Naruto shook his hand free with a huff and stormed off. The rogue prince followed his son with a weather eye. And where do you think you're going?
Somewhere far away from you, came the irritated shout.
As you wish, but stay away from that Hightower girl. A long finger rose to deliver a snarky salute. Daemon watched him go with a shake of the head. There'd be no stopping him today. Too kind, this son of his. Far too kind by half. Hopefully it wouldn't get him killed.
0.
Naruto loved King's Landing. Not the politics, he disdained those, but rather, the people.
So many places to see, so many secrets to ferret out, so much to do.
For if King's Landing was his home, then the Red Keep was truly his oyster. What an oyster it was. He'd always craved a large family, and now here in his second life, he finally had one. Such a large family. Daemon aside, he had his uncle Viserys, Aunt Emma, and little cousin Rhaenyra, to say nothing of his Velaryon relations. And of course, the dragons.
One mustn't forget the dragons. So many dragons.
Even after all these years, he still hadn't bonded with one, despite having his pick of the lot. Because you see, he only sought him.
The one. The greatest of them all. Lord of Dragons.
Valerian the Black Dread, lived. He was nowhere to be found in King's Landing these days. Not anymore. He had outgrown the dragon pit ages ago and flown far away, leaving his last living rider behind. Doubtless most thought him dead. Still he sensed him all the same, out there somewhere to the east. Distant, but strong, tired, yet alert, watching, or perhaps he was waiting. He couldn't be sure. In saving his life on that fateful day long ago, he forged an unbreakable bond with that weary old Wyrm. But bond or no, he had no true way of communicating with him at this distance, much less summoning him. Valerian would return when he wished. Not before. And when he finally did.
Well, those were thoughts for another time, but before that.
He skirted a pair of handmaidens in the hall, daring a quick smile in their wake.
Is that him? He's proper handsome. Shh, quiet, he'll hear you.
The ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. A quick look back sent them scurrying in a gaggle of giggles. He was well aware of their fleeting whispers in their retreat, just as he knew what others called him behind his back. For if his father was the rogue prince, then he was the renegade. The reprobate, the fanciful fool who threw money at flea bottom, who would rather talk than fight, an oaf who tried to make everything better. Ha, a renegade indeed. He quite liked that title. The irony stuck. Let them think what they liked. He hardly cared. A distant glimmer of light in a nearby tower window caught his eye. A lone candle was burning within. He tilted his head toward it, testing the evening breeze with one finger. Wind's howling today. Wonder if she's awake. He looked to the tower of the hand and grinned. The hour was late, the sun beginning to set, painting the red keep in deep shades of blood. An omen perhaps. He shook his head to clear it. A meandering stride carried him toward the tower. Curious, shouldn't there be guards on duty at this hour? Yet he saw no one. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Made certain no guards were near, no one to see nor hear.
Then he raced up the wall, running full tilt. 0, 0. Once more, Alicent lit the candle tonight. It had become something of a ritual for her in recent years, a habit she'd picked up when she was very small, and spending her first nights in the Red Keep. Every night she left a burning candle at her open window. Every night, she burned the wick down to nothing. The act brought her some small semblance of comfort these days, like a tiny spark raging against the dark L.
Having trouble sleeping, Tilda?
By the 7, Alicent yelped, and nearly jumped clean out of her green dress. Must you do that every bloody time?
Yes, we must. The prince grinned at her as he swung his way in through the window, careful to avoid the candle there. Oh, don't make that face. You missed us. She really had. He'd been gone for so long this time, she thought he might not return from Dragonstone. How he read her so easily, she knew not. Demon's son was a bit of an odd dragon, even among his own kind. She didn't quite understand how he got in and out of her quarters so easily. Surely no one could climb the towers so quickly as he. Frankly, he made even less sense than Rhaenyra these days.
Oh gods, he was giving her that look again.
She quirked a brow at him and spoke quickly, if only to avert his gaze. The royal we, is it? Naruto grinned at her, set the candle aside, and sketched a deep bow, knee bent and one arm to his chest. The very same. She felt her lips quirk into a small smile despite it all. You shouldn't be here at this hour. If my father saw you. He stood and rolled his eyes. He'd piss and moan, stamp his feet and do nothing. What about it?
Such an odd dragon.
Heat seared through her face and turned her ears red. She didn't know what the prince saw in her, let alone what compelled these nighttime visits of his. Father would not approve. He didn't like Daemon, or his son. It would take much to change that. And yet, if things didn't change, if King Viserys never had a son, no, she mustn't think that. Such thoughts were foul, the most treacherous of treason. Seared through her face.
Distractions. She needed to distract herself now more than ever. How was Dragonstone?
Wet and warm and boring. Naruto drawled. I'd though we could work on your High Valyrian again tonight. He picked up the candle from the windowsill, paced past her to the bed, snatching a heavy tome from the table as he went. In a matter of moments he was sat upon it, the tome spread open upon his legs. Well, the prince looked to her. What are you waiting for?
Alicent pulled a face, idly wringing her hands as she resisted the urge to pick at her fingernails. You know I'm not very good.
Hence the lessons. He set the candle down and thumped an open palm between the pages. Come on, where's the harm?
Everywhere, sitting right before her.
Are you really that afraid of me, Alicent? Naruto ran his hand over the candle as he spoke, idly curling his fingers into a fist before opening them again. The motion was strangely hypnotic. No matter how long his hand lingered over the open flame, it did not burn. His flesh did not blacken and char, nor did his sleeve burst into flame. Pale tongues of fire passed over his palm, leaving him unharmed. Despite her best effort, Alicent found her gaze lingering. She'd seen this feat before and wondered how he did it. A trick, perhaps. For all their claims to the contrary, not all Targaryens were immune to fire. And what of you? She sat beside him. Her free hand touched his. Aren't you afraid of being burnt? I don't fear fire. He hummed, idly staring into the flame. It's quite comfortable, really. No, those bright orbs swung back to her, haunting in their intensity. What I fear is the dirt. Being lowered into a box, my body left to rot. He shook his head with a rueful sigh. That won't be my fate. Her fingers curled around his. Just a hint. Just a touch. Then what is your fate? Naruto smiled a little at that. Would you like to know? He was so close to her. So very terribly close. Alicent found herself leaning forward. Wait. He held up a hand. She flinched. What?
Naruto kept his hand up, but his gaze was no longer on her. Do you hear that?
Alicent cocked her head. I don't hear anything. Nothing at all.
He let go of her. That's just it. I don't hear anything. His eyes widened. Oh no!
He was still speaking when door to her room burst open, ripped from its hinges by a powerful blow. Men boiled in, swords in hand. Stunned though she was by the sudden intrusion, Alicent had time enough to count them. 5, clad all in black. Rough men. Dangerous men. Not her father's men. What were they doing here? Where were the guards? How had they gotten past them? How? Oh gods. She saw the blood on their blades and she knew.